Well, today on Finding Traction, we ask the question, are you running your recovery, or is it still being led by your inner child? Today on Finding Traction, we look at that question, who's really running the show? Welcome aboard. Well, last podcast, we asked the question, is it helpful and necessary to understand aspects of my childhood that have either predisposed me or impacted me in a way that seemed to set me up for a struggle with things like porn? And we kind of examined and then dismissed some of the more extreme responses to that question. Things like, it's only your childhood that's important. It's all about understanding that one special key in your childhood. So an overemphasis on it. But then we also looked at other reactions, like people using things like past wounds and hurts to somehow evade or blame shift or to wriggle out from under responsibility for making their own healthy choices. And we introduced the book Going Deeper by Eddie Caparucci. And that's kind of what I want to talk about today in terms of helping us explore this topic in a little more detail. Now, if you don't have time to read, that's okay. In fact, a lot of guys I work with just say, Vern, I'm not really a reader. I have a son like that. He doesn't read a lot per se. He finds his information in different ways, through podcasts, through online, different sorts of things than traditional books. He's still a lifelong learner, even more so than myself. He just doesn't like to read a lot of books. And if that's the way you are, you know what? You're in a good place. I do like to read books, and I can read a book for you, and I can summarize it in a sort of Vern's notes or Cole's notes or whatever. And now that always runs the risk, of course, that I'm not accurately reflecting what the author actually said or meant. And so, for example, when we did the two books, Psychology of Porn and The Sexually Healthy Man, fortunately, I was able to have the author come in and just help to round out some of that. And I actually have heard back from Eddie Caparucci, and he is at some point willing to come on the show as well. So we're going to introduce him at some later point. But here's a quote from his book, and he says this: "The road to recovery runs through your childhood." Now, you might say, oh, okay, so he's a therapist. He's saying everything is about your childhood. Well, actually, he's broader than that, but he is saying your childhood is super important. So he does admit and does talk about other factors. But of course, his book is what focuses on areas of wounding from your childhood that seem to set you up for repeated destructive patterns, repeated destructive sexual patterns in your life. Now, remember the idea from last podcast as well, that your child is a runner. Whenever you as an adult you face experiences that cause what he calls a core emotional trigger, it's like your little child is turned on. Your little child wants to run and take you with him. Now, that little child is running from anything that reminds him of emotional discomfort or pain or wounding. And they do what they've always done. They run to find comfort, solace, excitement, anything that's worked in the past. They go, oh, I know how to deal with this uncomfortable feeling. It's porn. It's masturbation. It's running to my favorite happy place. So, to get a little more granular here, what I want to do is introduce you to what I found to be really super fascinating, and that is what Caparucci calls 9 types of inner children. Now, he says there's a lot more, but it's 9 that he's discovered that bear direct implications around our sexual behavior. Now, it's going to be interesting because the 1 to 8 actually don't have anything to do really with sex. It's only the 9th one which does, which kind of makes the point your sexual acting out doesn't really have to do directly or most importantly with sex. And most of you go, oh, really? I thought it had everything to do with sex. So listen to these 9 types. And as you're going through it, I want you to look for perhaps things that resonate with you or touch a raw nerve or elicit some sort of discomfort. And then we're going to cycle back around and talk about how we look at these as an overview. So here we go. These are 9 types of children that want to emerge when you face certain triggers. Here's the first one, the bored child. And this is a child that grew up with an absence of stimulation and were essentially left on their own and isolated. They raised themselves, so to speak. They believe as a result that no one really cares, and essentially they have to take care of their own needs. When they find things like porn, what it does is it gives them the stimulation that they so lack in the rest of their life. It gives them excitement. So you might say, okay, well, what would trigger that bored child in us today? Well, whenever we are feeling bored or restless, that inner child is triggered and going, oh, I know how to bring about some excitement or stimulation in your life. That's type 1. The bored child. Here's type 2, the unnoticed child. And this is a child that grew up with an absence or a sense of acceptance or belonging. The resulting belief they struggle with is that they don't matter, they're invisible, no one cares, they don't belong, or is it something's wrong with them. So what happens when they discover things like porn, masturbation? What happens is they, all of a sudden, especially with porn, find the attention of another. Even, of course, it's a virtual one or it's a pseudo one. And what happens is it taps into their deep craving for attention and belonging. I belong with this woman who's giving herself to me. You say, well, what triggers the unnoticed child in us today? Well, whenever, for example, we feel that we're being ignored or unnoticed or minimized, or something raises up in us and say, I know what to do in that situation. Number 2, the unnoticed child. Number 3, the unaffirmed child. Now, that's pretty self-explanatory, but this is a child that grew up with an absence of affirmation or praise. As a result, they believe that there's nothing special about themselves or there's something wrong with them. Porn offers them a sort of pseudo-affirmation because there's somebody who desires them, somebody who makes them feel special. So you may say, what triggers the unaffirmed child in us today? Well, could be when we're criticized or we don't feel appreciated, affirmed, or recognized. And that causes that child to be triggered in us. Type number 4, the emotionally voided child. Now, this is a child that grew up in an environment where expressing emotions were unwelcome, or when they did express emotions, they were poo-pooed or invalidated, and they weren't important or they weren't recognized. And as a result, these types of children learn to hide their feelings and go underground. Because they don't learn to express feelings, real emotions. What happens is they never learn to truly bond with another. So what happens when they discover porn or sex? What happens is they confuse sex for real intimacy between two people. Of course, porn is just pseudo-intimacy. It's not the real thing, right? And that works really well for the emotionally voided child. So what happens? What triggers that child? Well, that child is triggered whenever they, for example, are made to feel vulnerable or put on the spot or called out, and they feel like they're being asked to deliver something they can't deliver. It's not uncommon for a partner of an emotionally voided child who's been raised to feel like, you know what, I can't really connect with you. I feel like I'm living with a stranger. We never seem to get really close. You're not able to get close. And when we have sex, it doesn't feel like we're connecting emotionally. Type 5, the need for control child. Now, this is a child that grew up without a sense of safety. And perhaps it's because of the ongoing chaos in their life or the lack of stability, or just maybe they were never given freedom or agency to make choices in their own life. What happens is at one level, they start going, I really can't control. I'm powerless to change things. So, for example, sometimes this child says, I'm going to take control of every circumstance to protect myself from bad things happening to me. And because they live in constant anxiety that bad things are going to happen, they're super controlling. They're super anal about everything. They want to, in one sense, micromanage everything to avoid anything bad happening. Of course, porn and sexual behaviors leave them completely in control. So it works for them. They're not having to be vulnerable or out of control or something they can't manage. So what happens when the need for control child, how is that child triggered? Well, whenever they feel like, you know what, the world is spinning faster than I can manage it. See, porn offers relief from anxiety. You're able to stay in the driver's seat. So whenever you feel out of control or overwhelmed or anxious, sense things, again, spinning outside of your control, the inner child in you wants to assert control in what is a safe way. Number 6, the entitled child. Now, I'm taking some liberties here. I think Eddie went a bit of a different way, but I'm taking that word entitled and really drilling down on it, because for me, the entitled child would be like a spoiled child. It's a child that grew up without boundaries or hearing no, always getting what they want, always getting their way, or maybe having few opportunities to practice delayed gratification. They're given everything, without having to wait for it. As a result, these children grow up feeling entitled. They feel they can have sex the way they want, how they want. They learn to use other people for their own gratification. The bottom line is with this, what triggers a child, the entitled child? Well, whenever that child as an adult is told no, or wherever that child, that entitled child, feels unfairly treated, or they're being denied something that they feel they deserve or are entitled to, they want to slip back into that entitled child, and what works for them is their own sexual playground. Number 7, this is the inferior or weak child. And these are children that have been grown up being powered over by somebody stronger than them. They had no sense of control over their lives. The classic example is a child, for example, who was repeatedly bullied, for example, at school or on the playground or with neighborhood kids. It could be other variations of this. Whenever you were continually made to feel weak. As a result, you grew up believing you were weak. You grew up feeling that you were less than, undeserving of respect, always at the mercy of other people. There's a simmering anger as a result in this sort of child. Porn offers you a chance to be forceful, powerful, and it's a way of you living out the fact that in this playground, in this scenario, I'm the one who has the power. Sometimes people who are bullied or inferior, they look for opposite scenarios that reinforce their sense of inferiority. For people, they look for people to abuse them or people to take advantage of them, which strangely enough is comforting at one level. So what triggers the inferior child? Well, it's whenever they feel powered over, whenever they feel like they're being controlled and they can't affect the outcomes of their life. They tend to want to retreat into that safe place. 2 more. Number 8 is the stressed child. Now this sounds a little bit like one of the earlier children, the need for control child, but this is a child that grew up because they had no sense of peace. Their environment was constantly one of stress. As a result, they believe the world is an unsafe place. They believe things are out of control and they need to worry. They live in a constant place of anxiety. So what do sexual behaviors offer? Well, the opportunity to self-soothe. And when you self-soothe with something like porn, you feel better for a time. It's a coping mechanism. It's a distraction. So you say, well, what triggers that child? Well, that's pretty obvious, right? It's whenever there's core anxiety or a stressful environment or a sense of being overwhelmed. That stressed child wants to run to their favorite soother that they know. Now, I said that only the last one really had to do with sex as a primary one, and that is number 9, which was the sexually stimulated or abused child. Now, this is a child that grew up where either they were sexually abused or they were overtly sexualized in their developing years. They were exposed way too early to sexual images or their parents having sex or listening to, or whatever it was. They were exposed through abuse in their early developmental years. As a result, these children grow up believing that sex is bad and dirty. And as a result, they are bad and dirty, that they need to keep a secret. There's an overwhelming sense of shame that they experience. Now, it's interesting, children like this can at the same time also be obsessed with sex as well now. They go because in one sense, they want to almost relive that experience in their lives. Some would go on to abuse others, not all, and not the majority, but that can also be another scenario as well. It's like they're trying to, in one sense, work out that shameful excitement. The grown child may hide from their partner sexually because of shame, or it could be just that they have flashbacks. They're overwhelmed with shame. As a result, they hide. They live in a secret life. Their partner doesn't really know them. I've heard many stories of, for example, men hiding the fact that they were sexually abused for years and years, even from their wife. For that reason, that overwhelming sense of shame. So, those are the 9 types of children. Now, let me just say a couple ideas about them. First of all, as we went through them, were there some areas that seem to resonate with you more than others? The way Eddie describes it is he describes each of those children as a type of container that contain a cluster of possible triggers. So they're kind of groupings of different sorts of triggers. Now, I know, again, some of those might have been, that really sounds a lot like me or mostly like me. While others might be, that doesn't register at all. That is not my situation. One of the things that we do in our groups when we get together with guys, we just did this last week with one of my groups, is we have them go through and we essentially have people rank from 1 to 9 which type of children are the most resonate with them. 1 is the most important, 9 is, of course, the least. And then we begin to dive into the triggers and how to actually deal in a healthy way with those children, as opposed to a way where we simply let them carry us into areas where we don't want to go. We'll get to some of those strategies. Let me just say a comment about groups as well. We're in the process of, again, starting 1 or 2 more groups. I've got 3 or 4 going right now, but I do a group for pastors and leaders. I also do a group for just regular guys, and most of my groups are Monday, Tuesday, or Wednesday. So again, if you're interested, you can email me. I'm in the process of transitioning to a new email, and the new email is bandofbrothers.care@gmail.com. bandofbrothers.care@gmail.com. I'd love to hear from you. We'd love to be able to get you in one of our groups where we talk about this sort of stuff. It's amazing the insights that we've, just in this one group we've been doing it, about each other's lives. And sometimes it comes from listening to other people. And you start remembering stories or real formative things in your life that have gone unnoticed or untalked about for years. It's just fascinating to see the process that we go through when we share our lives deeply with one another. So here's to next time. Let me just say this: be kind and compassionate to your little child. Just don't let them run the show. We'll see you next time.